Hello, everyone. I'm Alicia McCoy, founder of Peak Mind, a mental well-being startup, and I'm thankful to lead this very important conversation and happy to have everyone tuning in. Here's to hoping for good Wi-Fi and a great discussion. We are here for the next hour to dialogue about seed stage capital investing for minority founders. To set the stage, let's quickly talk about the why. From 1970s to the present day, Black entrepreneurship has skyrocketed exponentially, yet the capital investment in these companies remains low. We know raising capital to scale business ventures is mostly catered to one racial group or another these days. The data is revealing. In Silicon Valley alone, 91% of venture capitalists are men. 98% of Silicon Valley VCs are white or Asian. And as you can guess, 90% of Silicon Valley VCs funding goes to companies led by white men. As a Black entrepreneur, finding investors for your startup is difficult, but not impossible. And now the what. We can speak openly about the paradigm shift of the regional economic competitiveness and the framework that establishes conditions for success and prosperity. In other words, understanding how the economic game is played and how to compete and win. The panel discussion will be around how, if capital is a critical resource and an entrepreneurial success, how do we embrace the blended capital approach to support the entrepreneurial ecosystem and remove institutional barriers, such as structural racism and sexism that are currently limiting capital flows to the founder from the more marginalized communities. I'm excited to hear from this panel about steps to move the needle forward. And this panel of women has the power to change that. They are committed to building relationships with and investing in Black and Brown founders. Honored to introduce the panelists. Their full bios are in the event platform. However, starting off, we have Ting Goody, 15 years of experience in alternative investment. She has spent 3 years at an international hedge fund on the private placement side before moving into venture capital in 2009. She was part of the founding team of Elevate Ventures, a top 10 active seed and early stage venture capital firm in the world. Elevate has multiple funds under management with assets allocated between primary investment funds and fund-of-fund programs. Elevate focuses on investing in pre-seed, seed, and early stage companies across multiple sectors and has built a portfolio of over 400 companies since 2010. Ting received her MA from Purdue University and MBA from Indiana University. She's also a holder of a chartered financial analyst, chartered alternative investment analyst, and a certificate in investment performance measurement. Very, very educated in this topic. Shantae Harris is a senior manager of venture for climate tech at Second Muse, a climate tech venture studio sourcing, funding, and scaling the most promising climate innovators across the globe. Named by America on Tech as Innovator and Disruptor in Tech Policy and Women E-News as Pioneering Women in Sustainability, Shantae is passionate about urban innovation, building sustainable cities, cross-sector collaboration, and tapping into community to launch better solutions, innovations, and technologies. She has worked to scale national campaigns, technologies, and ideas for the Obama administration, Fortune 500 companies, and startups. Shantae is a part of Second Muse Capital team and focuses on designing capital mechanisms, investing in companies, real estates, and funds, and working alongside innovators to operate in new ways. The capital team is currently raising a $50 million climate innovation fund with a regional focus on the Northeast and North America. Welcome, Shantae. Aniki Toto is a senior manager impact investing with Salesforce Ventures Investment Fund. Salesforce Ventures focuses on and invests in cloud technology solutions and demonstrates demonstrable impact in education and workforce development, sustainability, DEI, and the social sector. Welcome. Jackie Copeland, PhD, is a founder of Women Invested to Save the Earth Fund, or WISE. The WISE Fund is a funding equity enterprise using advocacy and creative financing to advance Black, Indigenous, and women of color and allied entrepreneurs and with promising technology and other strategies addressing the most compelling social and environmental challenges of our times. Through our WISE Leaders and Impact Fund, they blend philanthropy and impact investing to support early stage companies and NGOs using technology to impact climate change while restoring local natural ecosystems, creating green jobs, and improving public health. With a focus on low-income communities most affected by environmental decline, the WISE Fund works in Africa, Australia, Brazil, Caribbean, India, and the United States. Meet the first cohort of WISE investors at bit.ly wise leaders and learn more about the programs at thewisefund.org. You can hear from their bios that they know about capital investing. As we begin to discuss seed stage capital investing for minority leaders and founders, let's talk about the role of capital investment funds in increasing this percentage. What are funders doing right now to increase the percentage? How could you summarize your answer in a few minutes? Ting, you want to kick us off on this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Alicia, for having me here today. We're very glad to kick off the topic. As we all witnessed in the last few years, diversity inclusion is an important topic for the entire industry for the last few years. During my last 15 years in the industry, I haven't really seen such a discourse and attention and conversation around this particular topic. But the question you raised, Alicia, is more toward what are we actually doing besides just having conversations. What I'm seeing the last few years that's really encouraging is really kind of on the three fronts. One or two are mostly around voting with our dollars, right? We're seeing that not just from people who are interested in seeing more dollars going to diverse founders, but also investors, whether on the institutional or individual side, who are actively investing funds. They are having specific mandates or looking for emerging fund managers who may be looking for a special edge in terms of supporting diverse founders. So that's one level of supporting with dollars. Even on the capital deployment side, what I've seen is a lot of the fund general partner level partnerships, not only looking at portfolio companies, advocating their portfolio companies from board construction to recruiting senior management team members, really put a spin around extra time and attention toward finding that diverse talent. And even with their own firm recruiting, because part of your problem you pointed out, Alicia, is the fact that a lot of people running in the investing roles tend to be of certain race or gender profile. So we need a lot of the local support here, including me, when we're looking to recruit emerging leaders to our funds, we put a little more emphasis. We put a lot more emphasis around who are the next generation of fund managers that may represent different perspectives and different backgrounds. And lastly, I think just from industry-wide perspective, again, kind of going beyond just having conversations, a lot of funds are taking a lot more data-driven approach. So we don't know whether we'll succeed or not if we don't measure how we're doing. And a lot of funds are a lot more transparently, including us, reporting out what we're doing from a diversity and inclusion standpoint. And that's further supported by our industry group, the National Venture Capital Association recently spun out their diversity nonprofit called Venture Forward that actually just celebrated their first anniversary. So very encouraged by all the different actions that's been taken place in the industry.
Great. That's awesome. Thank you for the transparency. It's appreciated. And that's great to hear all the things that Elevate is doing and also the NVCA. From the other panelists, do you have any insight you would also like to mention?
Happy to chime in here. I think, at Salesforce, we obviously recognize that there is so much work left to be done here, and recognizing that we need to still do the work. But a couple things that we've done and completely agree with Ting on sort of where the issues lie is we see a sort of a disparity in the funders, right? Not having enough funders who are diverse. And so we launched Black Venture Institute last year alongside Black VC to help bring more funders, to help, build a new group of funders out there who can look outside of the traditional networks that VC tends to rely on and really build out a more diverse network of founders, of funders, and companies out there. And then I'd say the other thing is looking outside, similarly looking outside, not just building new funders, but looking at funders that at the seed stage, obviously we're a Series A plus investor. And so partnering with different accelerators who are specifically focused on helping partner with these diverse founders and who are working to really build them up to that Series A stage and looking to support them in their journey afterwards. And then lastly, one thing that I thought was interesting NVCA did do is add in the diversity rider. We've seen this become a big topic at the NASDAQ level when companies want to go public, requiring a more diverse board. And so I think starting those conversations earlier at the investment level and really building out a diverse board for founders is also really important.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Jackie or Shantae, anything that hasn't been mentioned that you'd like to interject?
Sure. Well, first, I just want to say I feel like Salesforce is really doing amazing work. I think when we talk about the future of funders, right, everyone is sort of focused on the actual VCs, which I'm really excited about because it means there's a level of accountability. Like you see Crunchbase, you see all of these new tools coming out that are actually tracking and measuring where we are in relation to diversity. I think the first part to solving any problem, right, is really understanding the numbers and not only understanding them, but having them to say, why is this the case? We're seeing a lot of fellowship programs grow or expand that are actually helping younger generations get into the VC space, which I think is so critical here. Gen Z is really, really shaking things up in a way that I think we're just starting to wrap our heads around. I mean, we're talking about folks who are changing not only the way they look at the future of their careers and their access to capital, but I think also what in 10 years we'll see be a really big shift in who's actually funding the funders. And I think that's something that's really interesting to think about as Gen Z, as more millennials become these high net worth individuals that can become LPs. And I think that the VCs that aren't paying attention to that or even maybe undermining it are really going to miss out on a big shift, but also a big opportunity. And I'm excited about it because I don't plan to miss out on it. And I think that a lot of people here also don't. And it means that we can do some exciting things around not only diversifying the roles, right, at funders or at firms, right, that are funding companies, but also diversifying LPs, which I think is one of those things that doesn't get talked about as much. Like we know it matters, we know it's there, and it's this really big fundamental problem with how funding actually trickles down into economies and into local entrepreneurs. And we're also seeing things around angel syndicates. I'm in the climate space and so many syndicates have popped up. I think the introduction of rolling funds, I think the fact that people are going to, whether it's folks at VC firms or other high net worth individuals and saying, hey, invest in this syndicate, be a part of what we're doing. And we're seeing a lot of momentum there. And I think the reason why it matters for what we're talking about today is regionally, we know that certain areas historically have been underfunded on top of all of the other disparities that exist within this space. And I think as we talk about syndicates, as we talk about future generations, there's a real opportunity to pull this funding together and start to fill in those gaps.
Yeah, I really just am going to echo some of what Shantae and Ting and Erica mentioned, but maybe I'll focus a bit on the policy space because this is definitely a systems issue. And so we need a systems change solution that's working at multiple fronts. The new laws across the country that are emerging requiring diverse boards is really key at the corporate level, but I'm hoping that that also seeps into the venture capital level. I think that's a conversation and push we need to have because many of these policies focus on publicly traded companies. I also wanted to bring to everyone's attention that the Women Invested to Save Earth Fund, as part of its Black Philanthropy Month initiative, and Black Philanthropy Month is now a global coalition of funders of all backgrounds, philanthropy, venture, and also impact investors, trying to address the issue of underfunding and representation in the capital space. And we're in our 10th anniversary. We've had 18 million people participate across 60 countries. And so it's a very globally diverse coalition that's also including Africa and its diaspora worldwide. It's really exciting to expand the lens from the US and realize that there are mirror images of the same kinds of movements to promote equal access to capital as sort of the last frontier of the civil rights and the human rights and women's rights movement. And so we linked them all up in Black Philanthropy Month. And last year we created something called the Global Black Funding Equity Principles. And we have about 30 organizations that have signed a pledge to implement these principles, largely in response to the corporate proclamations about equal or fairer funding to Black communities that came out last year. And we're in the process of developing a funding equity index, a composite index that can be used at institutional level and various geographical levels, from municipalities to counties, nations, and the world. Because I believe one of the challenges is to the extent that we have measurement tools, they tend to focus on only one component. They might look at representation, but they're not necessarily looking at funding per se, and they're certainly not looking at blended funding. So the philanthropy sector has its measures, and then there are various studies that might look at women, for example, but not include all Black people. So we're going to put, with the help of my associate, the Black Philanthropy Month information, as well as the funding equity movement information in the chat. And I think that whatever we can do to move policy, so we address issues of structural racism and sexism, it will make real change more possible and long lasting.
That's great. And we'll have a slide later in the presentation that also lists some of those resources. Thank you, Jackie.
Oh, thank you. I wasn't sure about that.
You're welcome. And we've talked about the funding side, which is fantastic, and we'll come back to it a little bit later. But as we're talking about, Shantae, you mentioned new areas. As we're going into new communities and trying to stir up new talent and new founders, what are some of the due diligence requirements that these founders have never had access to that you guys see on your due diligence checklist? But what might some of the requirements be? What are some hindrances that these underrepresented Black and Brown founders or women that aren't used to this ecosystem, what might they face? Can you lean in on that?
Sure, happy to kick us off. We focus a lot on the earliest stages of entrepreneurship. So very, very much pre-seed, seed, at times Series A. And I think what we're seeing, which is exciting, is a lot of new fund managers in this space, a lot of diverse fund managers who are recognizing the lack of funding going to our communities and have really stepped up to the plate. And fundraising is no joke, whether you're a founder or a fund manager. I think many would argue that it's harder if you're a fund manager. And I know people who are like, I was a founder and I was a fund manager, and yes, fund management is harder. But all of that to say that, it's not about putting the two against one another. It's saying that in some ways there's sort of a shared experience here, right? Of founders, of diverse founders saying, hey, we're not getting access to the type of funding we need, and fund managers who are entering this space and really shaking things up saying, we're not getting funding that we need, or it's taking us substantially longer to actually reach our goals around funding. And I think ultimately for early stage in particular, some of the due diligence requirements are not standard, to be frank. Like it can be, it doesn't mean that we're not looking at second use. We certainly are looking at our founders as, hey, how do we help them really understand their customers? We run a bunch of incubation and innovation programming across the globe. So venture studios, incubators, accelerators, as well as venture studios. And I think what we realized over time was, hey, we're creating this really great, entry point for founders. We're providing them with a lot of non-dilutive capital. So we're not taking equity because we understand the value of ownership in our communities. But what we're seeing is that after they leave these programs, they're struggling to get the money that they need, right, in their seed, in their Series A. And, it matters that we step into that capital space. And so that's what we've done now. Now we do have funds that we're both designing, operating, and managing, because we think it's our responsibility to not only support these founders at their earliest stages, but then to also make sure that they're getting the funding they need. But I think to answer your question, like, when it comes to due diligence, I think there hasn't been standards. And so what we've been trying to do is actually encourage not only our capital team, but also all capital providers to look at ecosystem development as part of what they do. I think many VCs have historically benefited from, the innovation programming that gives the founders the resources and the various tools they need to scale, but they're oftentimes not investing in them. So those investments are coming from foundations, they're coming from governments, and that's great. But I think, providing a real quality level of deal flow to VCs means that they should also be a part of providing that support earlier on. And I'm not going to say that everyone agrees with that, but I'm going to say that I think it really matters, and it matters even more for diverse communities. And so I think, that's a really big gap that we see in supporting founders, because they are getting some of the early stage support, but then there's a lack of funding, right, between that kind of initial funding and then their ability to scale over time. And so I think we need to standardize more of that. And I think it needs to be more transparent. And I think one of the ways that that's going to continue to happen is to have more diverse capital providers and asset allocators at the earliest stage of funding for founders.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I might add, if Alicia, this is the direction you want to go in, is that the impact investing industry is just huge. I saw a figure from a study at Oxford University that said it is now a $40 trillion global market and has been increasing sometimes by 100, 200% per year or so. And the founders that we're talking about, who often have impact-oriented businesses because they are in part motivated by helping their community and the world. Women and people of color are not getting any access that's notable. I mean, the studies that exist indicate that it's largely statistically irrelevant. It's even hard to measure. And so from a blended capital perspective, I think we need to talk about also more about how to get diverse founders access to impact investing flows. And one of the things we're trying is in September, we're going to launch what we call the People's Impact Fund, because the other side of it, from the investor perspective, the cost, the minimum investment amount required by the largest funds is beyond the means of the average investor. But I do think there is a sort of a consumer market for impact investing, and we're trying to access that market to bring more funding to the companies. We just started last year, so we have 7 companies that we're supporting in the US and abroad. And so I do think more discussion and work to make impact, the exponentially growing impact investment field, accessible to both founders and investor consumers is an important part of this conversation.
You're right. And that makes me realize that, as a seed founder, a startup, minority, woman-owned, education and awareness early on was critical to me getting to this point, having an MVP that I'm about to commercialize. And so, I want to mention a couple people who aren't on the panel for at least the local indie community that have been, vital in supporting my journey getting to the VC stage, like the Startup Ladies, the Be Nimble Accelerator Foundation. Katie Burge has done a great job to create a social enterprise investment accelerator. Dora Lutz has talked a lot about this space, impact investing, and has a book, I believe. Nexus Office is available for minority founders that she's blending. Robin Lee over there at Nexus is blending the philanthropic side with the for-profit side and really creating a space that's, welcoming and supportive of the education and awareness for founders like myself. So those are some outside of the panelists for today, but great topic so far. And this is great to start thinking about how we can work to tackle funding for the underrepresented founders. And like Ting said, we need more action to move forward. And I think these are spurring up some of the next action steps that people can take in meeting founders where they are and nurturing their entrepreneurial spirit might just allow more founders to continue on the path of funding and success. So I love the conversation so far. And some of in the pre-conference discussions I had with some of the panelists, we talked about if you can't give funding, if an entrepreneur is not ready for funding, what else can you do to support them? So we've talked about some of the things, and I just want to mention a couple bullet points before going to our next question. You can connect them with paying customers. If you have somebody in your network that, you believe in a product and you can make a connection, an introduction is fantastic. You might be able to connect them with a possible mentor. You might know somebody that if they're lacking in sales, I just went through a sales boot camp to get me into sales shape. And, and that was critical for me in my journey. You can give them your time, whether it's 5 minutes or 30 minutes, just to let them know what they could do to be able to better secure funding the next time they ask, or with another fund. And you can, again, just use your time, talent, and testimony to support founders and underrepresented. If you see a spark in them, let others know that, because that can also help to motivate and to inspire others to invest in this community. So let's see, moving into, we've talked about the population that we know is underrepresented. How do we give them a bigger seat at the discussion at the table earlier on? How do we start to open up this conversation and bring this underrepresented community to the table? Aniki, do you want to start us off and talk about maybe some of the community events that you guys are doing at Salesforce?
Sure. I think, specific to this question, one way I think we hear from this population is obviously looking outside, and I mentioned this before, but looking outside of our own networks that we rely on and we are so tied to. I think it's really diversifying where founders are coming from and making sure that we show up in those places. For example, one thing we've done is participate in the TechCrunch Include office hours. And so you get to meet with founders that maybe you wouldn't have met with before. And so I think that's going to be critical. I also think, kind of walking it back to talking about the diverse funders out there, I think as more and more we diversify funders from race and gender and socioeconomic backgrounds, I think ultimately having those funders out there, it will lead to more investment in those communities. And will lead to them being a voice for the funders that are coming from, or the founders rather, that are coming from their communities. And Jacqueline had mentioned this, as an impact fund, we love our diverse portfolio, and we're proud to have such a diverse portfolio and share those metrics publicly. But part of the reason we do see that is because these founders are building businesses that are directly serving their communities, and that tends to be an impact focused investment. So the other thing I would say is almost on the funder side, so often we hear that, it doesn't fit the mandate, therefore that's why you can't have a seat at, this institutional fund or whatnot. And I think part of it is really kind of walking back what you view as your mandate and really digging into these businesses. Because I think ultimately when you keep drilling down, they do have, and I'll speak only on the enterprise software side because that's where we're focused, but they are enterprise software companies that are really, will do great, are doing great, have high growth numbers, have landed those amazing customers. And so I think part of it is also just shifting your mindset, and as an institutional fund, sort of leading those Series A and B rounds into really understanding sort of, is this company actually part of my mandate, versus just saying, well, education or it's, D&I, therefore it doesn't meet my mandate. Well, actually it does if you drill down. And we've definitely seen more and more institutional funds in the past year, lead big rounds in this space, which is really exciting. And I think part of what's driving the growth in impact investing overall. But completely agree. I think part of what founders need to do to make their voices heard is really make connections everywhere, and funders need to be open to those not only warm introductions, but the cold reach outs as well, because it's a very, very vulnerable place to come from to just randomly reach out to someone. But I do think that we more and more need to understand them and kind of be open to those cold reach outs, not just looking within the network.
You mentioned the cold reach outs, and I've seen a couple different people post in some women founder groups that say, in order for them to secure seed funding, they've had to reach out to 240, venture capital studios. And, over 50% of that, nobody responded, not to put you guys on the spot, but just to shine light on the job, right? How difficult it is, how many people you guys have emailing you for this. Maybe it is a hard journey for the founders, but like you said, it's also a hard journey for you guys. Does anybody want to share, a tidbit or maybe an email title or an email video or something that got your attention that maybe can make a founder stand out in those, thousands, I'm sure, of applicants and emails that you guys are getting?
I'll chime in. Sorry, I keep going, but I think one piece of advice that I would offer is make sure you understand the mandate of the fund themselves. Oftentimes, like, we're very public about what our mandate is. We are focused on enterprise software. We look at B2B companies. And so oftentimes companies just don't fit our mandate. And that's part of the reason why, we might not have the best advice or be able to be the best resource if you're building a direct to consumer business, for example. So I think part of it is doing the due diligence and narrowing down the pool of investors that you reach out to the ones that really align with, your business and can be the most additive to your business as well, because those are the ones that will help you move into the next milestone too. And then the other thing is being able to be very concise and crisp in what your business model is and what your company does. I think, like, if you can do it in a quick paragraph so that someone can quickly understand and not have to do, obviously add in the additional information for them to go into if they're excited, but I think the quick email is much easier to get attention, just because, like you mentioned, we get so many. And so if it's too long, you're like, I will get back to this later. And then, the 95 other things on your to-do list pop up. And so I think those I've seen be really, really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I kind of cut my teeth as a funder in the community and foundation philanthropy space. And there are some models there that I think would be more, I'll say, people-oriented models that could be helpful to this question. I think it's important to have a staff position dedicated to founder outreach and capacity building that can help with some of that responding to applicants who don't fit. Alicia and others sort of mentioned some informal TA and advice that can be really critical for applicants who don't fit. And I think building that capacity into our organizations is really critical as we become agents of systems change, because obviously it's difficult to get to everyone. But that's a public service that's really vital and can turn a really high potential founder in the right direction and be fundamental to their success.
That's great. And it can be the spark
go ahead.
The spark that a founder might need to continue going on their journey, because it is a tough journey. But Shantae, what were you going to say?
I was just going to double click. I'm blanking on the tool, but if I remember it, I'll try to send to the team. But there is a tool that actually now, because it can take a lot of time for founders to look at investment theses. I think especially because historically a lot of funders have not been clear on what they invest in. And so I want to acknowledge that and say that there is a tool. There are a few tools out there now that actually have done a lot of that work. So aggregated the thesis of various funding vehicles so you can go on and see what they focus on. I think spending your time where you know that where they want to hear from you matters. So you can email 250 VCs, but if only 50 of them actually invest in your space, it can be perceived as a waste of time, because many of them, I think, to the earlier point, right, won't be the best equipped to help you, or won't fund you at any point. And so how do you get to the sources that do? I think the other part of it too is following up. I mean, at Second Use, we really value founders reaching out to us. We also have a lot of emails coming in, and so that means, follow up. And if you don't hear back the first or second time, it doesn't necessarily mean that people don't want to support you. It just means that the email got lost, or maybe your ask wasn't clear. And so making sure that you are clear when you reach out of like what you're expecting or what you're looking for, but also that you follow up from time to time, because sometimes it really is just that it got lost in spam or it got lost in an inbox. And so I really do encourage folks to make sure that they're reaching out to the right folks, but also that they follow up.
Yeah, and I want to add one last thing to this. It's such an important topic in terms of bringing more voices to the table. But to all of your point earlier about building a little more diverse network, building a startup from ground up, from building nothing into something of worth is really, really hard work. That's true to diverse founders. It's true to anybody who's trying to do this. So it's super critical to have that support network. It's even better if the support network, it's a little more diverse in terms of the credibility, the stage, the company, the kind of where the next stage you are trying to get to. Because Alicia, even back to your prior question about diligence hindrance, to be honest, my role here is leading a lot of diligence activities at Elevate. Before your question, I just being fully transparent. Never even dawned on me to think of that way. That's why it's good to be part of this and also give me a different perspective. And I kind of went through our standard list, which, by the way, we share with the entire community and anybody who's interested. One thing that's kind of stand out is we do, because a lot of the seed stage investing oftentimes is pre-product and pre-revenue. So you're really kind of the most critical piece you're evaluating on is that founding team and whether they're able to build a mentor, advisory, or support network, and then can help them get there. So all the references we'll be conducting, the more credibility you bring, and more a diverse experience that's conducive to your startup you bring to that network through that network will just be just another kind of an edge, not just for you compared to other diverse founders, but just the entire pool. So that's something I'll offer as an added comment.
Ting, I think you made a really great point on the network too, because oftentimes in our diligence requirements, you're looking at, especially on the B2B side, you're looking at who your main customers are, and have you been able to land a big customer. And oftentimes I think VCs presume that they're the ones helping land those customers, but that's definitely not true. I think founders can do that through their own networks, and it's kind of looking at the local enterprises within your cities. And I think that comes with, enterprises building in different cities, not just in San Francisco, New York. I mean, I'll say that because Salesforce has an office in Indy. So, but we've also seen lots of founders come out of, graduating from Salesforce and building their own companies. And so I think you can definitely look outside your network. It's not just the investors in the region that can help you land those, beachhead customers that'll get you the highlight to get to the Series A, which is obviously, one of the diligence requirements.
That's great. And I know, Ting, you volunteered your time yesterday on another panel that I was able to hear you speak on, and you mentioned something that, VC isn't for everybody. And I think that's important to founders to know that getting to that point is a path, but not the only path. And that could also be a reason why some emails are not returned. Like you guys said, you might not fit, the funding mechanism doesn't fit what they're building. And so just speaking to that, is there something, as we talked about, in maybe trying to do better with email responses and let that funder know or that founder know that this isn't for them? Are there any resources such as angel networks that are maybe under marketed that we could start guiding some of the early founders to? Does anybody want to speak to that?
I mean, I mentioned this earlier, but there are a ton of angel syndicates coming online. I would say start with AngelList because a lot of them are listed there now, as AngelList has upgraded the back end of its platform to service syndicates. I think also asking around, a lot of people are locally involved in investing in their syndicates. So you'll find things like Miami Angels or New York Angels. And I think, I know 1,000 Angels, I think is a national network. There's Pipeline Angels, which is for women investors. So I think really asking around, doing some Google search and seeing what's out there. I think many angel syndicates want to hear from founders. And so finding their contact and reaching out is a really great way to get started. I think to your point around VC isn't for everybody, I think that's such an important point. I think it oftentimes gets overlooked. I think there's a lot of craze around VC at the moment. And so even in working with my founders, they're very early and we're like, let's get you focused on your product market fit. Let's get you understanding your customers. Let's get that first customer in the door. And then let's talk about investment. Not to say that that's what they're going to do, right? I'm only one voice, but I think at the end of the day, building a profitable business is always in your favor, and really focusing on knowing your customers, scaling the business, bootstrapping, building that network is not only going to make fundraising more easy, but also allow you to have a more sustainable business. And I think when we start to talk to some founders later down the line, they start to realize what equity really looks like and what it means to give up parts of ownership of your company. And I think historically, a lot of founders, and especially I'll say minority founders, have not been educated on what that looks like for their company. And so we've seen some not great stories around, what it means for them to have ownership of the company and then no longer have that type of ownership. And I think that's really, really important to double down on. It's something that I talk to our founders a lot about. So I think it's important to recognize there are other ways to finance your company. There's debt, there's loans, there's, even the impact investing side. We provide non-dilutive capital. So looking at programs that do the same, there's pitch competitions and challenges, there's gaining customers, and so I think really important things that founders should holistically be thinking about as it relates to growing their business.
Yeah, and I just think that's great advice. I don't have much to add to that, but I will say that the Women Invested to Save Earth Fund is actively looking for US-based underrepresented founders with climate change technology solutions. And we can be contacted at give@thewisefund.org.
That's great. And maybe as we, think about bringing new networks online and stirring up and finding this talent, think about those people that might be passionate about climate, to Jackie's point, and maybe there is a single mother or a mother working from home that's passionate about this and has a business idea, but has never been vocal and never had the courage to be vocal. And I think as we look at women and underrepresented founders, we can start talking about entrepreneurship and say, do you have an idea around that? And that can start to say, hey, I've got somebody that you could at least talk to, vet the concept, so I think we can empower and embolden more people that are passionate, right? Because we know that passion can drive a successful company. And so maybe be open to having more conversations with friends and family that you pass by that are really passionate about a topic. What about, we talked about a little bit, somebody mentioned profit, because we're in business to make profit. And so we've seen statistics about how women-led companies are more successful, or having a woman on your board, you're more successful. Does anybody have any metrics that they want to speak to that? Or heard any good articles lately around that topic?
The citations aren't coming to mind, but there is an increasing amount of research that shows that proves that diversity is profitable. whether it's women-led businesses or just businesses that are led by a cross-section of the markets we're supposed to serve. And so what I will do is follow up and include some of those links in the chat, but it's very important to keep making this data-based argument for diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging. I think most people believe that talent is evenly distributed across humanity, but in reality, our policies and practices tend, not this group, of course, but in the system writ large, tend to be based on often implicit biases. Well, women are not good at business or math or tech, and they're not good managers because they're too soft, or just all the sort of kitchen table talk is still very palpable and real and seeps its way into our businesses sometimes. And so the data is showing that that's really a backwards and counterproductive approach to any type of business that does not promote sustainability, maximize profits, especially in a rapidly changing world with compounding crisis, is very important. So I'm going to take a moment and find some of this data and put it in the chat, because we all need to be conversant with it when we come. There's still the notion that diversity is political correctness and not beneficial, and even a distraction from, quote, real merit and business.
Yeah, I think part of the challenge may be contributing to kind of getting such outcome data, as you mentioned, Alicia. It's just the fact that we're still early. When I say we, all of us, still early in terms of supporting diverse founders, building successful companies, and that's a long cycle, right? We can probably recall in the Silicon Valley history is only dating back to the 1950s, and the last 20 plus years, we can probably recall easily the white guys who made built more unicorns than women or diverse founders. It just takes time. Founders like you're at just beginning stage of your company building, and we're cheering for you and hoping you absolutely wanting you to help you to be as successful as you can. But it does take time in terms of not only startup maturation, but also community maturation. And so maybe an interim kind of a measurement I would just come to my mind is, measuring how many more easily tangible data sets is how the diverse founders have truly become venture-backed. I know there's various Crunchbase and other sources that are tracking that data. Even locally, the upcoming Indiana Venture Report, I'll just going through the list of venture-backed founders here locally. I was positively surprisingly pleasantly surprised of how long the list is, which to me, it's a great testament to the progress. Still baby steps in the grand scheme of things, but the number of women founders and diverse founders were able to get truly venture backed in the last few years. So these are progress. I think we can, in the grand scheme, in support of our continued progress it's important that we celebrate small success, whether it's Alicia, you landed a major enterprise customer, or companies like yours raised a Series A funding from Salesforce Ventures, or one of our founder company gets sold for hundreds of millions of dollars. Those are successes that's really going to get people's attention and set the role model for the other diverse founders to say they are pathways to success.
That's great. Shantae or Enki, do you have anything to add to that, or any thoughts?
I think just echoing the comments made. I think building out diverse teams. I think Jacqueline just shared something. I found something else. Like it is good for the business, and therefore you do want, ultimately as an investor, you want your companies that you're backing to be successful, because that's how everyone wins. And so I think keeping a mind on diversity is not just a nice thing to do or something for your own moral conscience. I think it's an imperative to have it to backing the best companies and having the best returns ultimately.
Yeah, I'll just add, I mean, I think everything we do at Second Muse is about diversifying, right, future economies and really living into the intention that we can build economies of the future that are more resilient, sustainable, and inclusive, and that it's not an opt-in, it's just this is what's happening. And so how do we live into that? How do we acknowledge that the future of innovation, the future of technology, the future of capital has to account for this diversifying space, and the founders that we've already identified are building the best solutions and innovation. So I think to the earlier point made, it's not about it solely being impact focused. It's about it also being what's smart for business. And so I've thought a lot about our non-diverse founders actually in our portfolio as they build out their teams. How do they incorporate diversity into what they're doing? How do they think about their impact locally for communities where they're deploying their technologies? And so I think a big part of it is also moving past solely the conversation around diverse founders. While I think that's important and diverse fund managers are important, we also know that, I think to Ting's point, right, things take time, and the reality is it's still not where we want it to be. And so while that continues to be the case, how are we equipping non-diverse founders to bring on, right, additional leadership within their founding teams? Because we all know that I know many people who have joined some of these unicorns and made a lot of wealth, and now they're investors themselves, and maybe they didn't found the company, but they were the first CTO or the first product manager, and they received a substantial amount of equity and now have a substantial amount of wealth to then pour back into the communities that we're all here to discuss. So I think making sure that we're looking at it holistically and really diving into like how do we champion diversity and inclusion at every stage of technology, whether that's through building teams internally, how our founders build their teams, right? I mean, we don't have to get into the conversation around AI and bias and what it means to integrate certain technology into what folks are building. But I think all of these things have to be happening simultaneously. And I think we'll be a lot more pleased and a lot happier with the outcomes if we talk about what we're doing from that diverse perspective.
That's great. You know, and as at Peak Mind, we talk about change a lot because we're trying to empower employees to lower their stress. And so, you know, in realizing what your stress triggers are, you know, should make change in your life. And so with the theory of change that says that it's going to be hard. So anything is hard, you know, Shantae, you alluded to it. It's going to take time, and change is not going to be pleasant sometimes, but we've done a lot of education and awareness in this space. So it's nice that I feel, you know, there's been enough panels to educate everyone that this is an issue. You know, we've shined a light on awareness. And I think the next part that we talk about at Peak Mind a lot is having compassion. And compassion can look different from whether you're a founder, and we need to have compassion with the VC funds or the angel network, right? Because it's going to take you all time to change. And so we need to have compassion and understanding there, and vice versa, having understanding and compassion for an underrepresented foundation that doesn't know how to approach, you know, a perfect email, maybe the first time, but with gentle nudges, you know, again, the theory of change says that if you nudge people gently, so maybe if we have coworkers that need a gentle nudge, having enough compassion over time will help them to be able to move into a positive direction. So I bring that up because I preach that a lot for our technology and our company. Is there, you know, as we're in the last few minutes, is there any other insights or leave behinds that you haven't had a chance to mention that you would like to let, you know, minority founders know? Ting, do you want to start with you?
I really like, I'll just wrap by saying really like the word you use, compassion, and it's a good segue, kind of very transferable to what I call seek that shared experiences. And going back to building a corporate company is really hard, no matter what race, gender you are. So I know, at least in our community, most founders are pretty genuinely interested in learning about issue and help whenever they can. So, and I know sometimes it is intimidating just to reach out and trying to get advice. But look for that shared experiences. You probably be pleasantly surprised the amount of barrier other founders have to go through and how much you can resonate with them. Having that compassion both ways, that's a good way. I think that's a good way to build a compassion and really keep building that resilience that's needed to be successful in the end.
For sure. Shantae, is there anything you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would be remiss if I didn't mention all of the innovation programming again. I mean, we've seen through all of the work that we do across the globe at Second Muse that these early stage programs are so critical to founders and supporting them not only in their fundraising journey, which is certainly what we do, but I think also supporting them in all of these really important factors around growth that matter as well, whether it's education, mentorship, access to one-on-ones with even friendly investors before they start pitching, understanding what it means to pull together a deck, understanding things like cap tables, right? And what it means to create a data room, like all of these pieces that somehow when you become a founder, people just assume you'll understand. And I think that that is what we really know needs to be at the crux of a lot of the work that we do. So highly encourage folks to not only check out Second Muse's programming. We have had some specifically minority programming in the past few years, Morning Light as well as Connective based in Florida. And we've just seen such amazing work, and not only the impact of the work that we're doing, but also the diversity numbers. And of course, we've been very, I think, focused on bringing in diverse founders, but it's also not been like a heavy lift. And I think that's what's important to name here, is that when you do the work, when you acknowledge it's not a pipeline problem, that it really is how do you get in front of the right communities and bring people in? You can diversify this space. You can diversify the number of founders. So highly encourage founders to look into these local programs and find the resources that they need and some of the champions that I think will really take them under their wings in this journey, which is so important. I think the other thing I wanted to mention, it's not a tool that I created, but of course now I'm blanking, but there's a tool that a diverse fund manager made recently. I'll try to drop it in the chat if I can find it. But it's basically a founder and funder matching tool through the community fund. And we've seen some really great numbers come out of it. Lolita, there we go. Lolita Taub is the writer. She has a newsletter. Highly recommend folks take a look at that. They invest in underrepresented founders building community. And so creating solutions and technologies for community. And she created that tool, I think, around this time last year, or a little bit before then. And they've been able to actually match founders with different VCs. So highly encourage founders to go take a look at that. And I'll try to find it and drop it in the chat now.
You're right. And I've personally been able to benefit since signing up with her network. And I had 2 VCs reach out to me from that network. And I asked them, on the call, I said, I'm curious, is this a reputable source? Because I was kind of, leery about it at first. And both of the gentlemen that had called me said, yes, we very much respect her and what she's building. And so that was validation for me. And I just want to share that with other founders. So that is something to look into. Enki, as we're wrapping up, anything that is on your mind that you haven't been able to mention?
Yeah, I think Shantae and Tank did a great job of wrapping up some of the thoughts that I had too. I think mine is more a call out to the funders out there. I think really looking through different resources for how to find deal flow outside of the typical ways. And we're all busy, but I think spending some time doing that, I think, is so important. And lending an ear to founders. And I think on the founder side, not being afraid to ask, an investor, even if they aren't relevant to your business, they still look at a lot of pitch decks. They still listen to a lot of pitches. So use those conversations as a way to practice and find, people in your community that can give you that honest feedback and present your best version of yourself and your company and really taking the time to be vulnerable and asking for that feedback, because it is important. And I think everyone is willing to help. It's just, we might not know that the help would be received. And so, I think that's sort of what I'll leave off with.
Thank you. Well, please feel free to reach out to me and the other panelists with any further questions and comments you may have. Good luck, and may those that choose to pursue capital investing be successful and win. And cheers to equity and inclusion and representation for all. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.